Good morning, friends. Today we are privileged to have Captain Raghu with us and hope you enjoy this session and it will be more interactive for you to learn more views from him. So good morning, Captain.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks a ton for this opportunity.
Pleasure, Captain. So Captain, our viewers are very keen to learn and hear about what of the learnings that you would like to share with us during your time with the Indian Army.
I think I spent, if I include my training, something like about 12 and a half years in the army, and there is no way it'll take 12 lifetimes to narrate the learnings that anybody learns while serving with the armed forces. But some of the basic fundamentals, I think, that the armed forces work with and they're able to perform extraordinarily well is about teamwork. You will notice that in the army we don't normally promote any individual gladiators. It's always the unit's name, it's always the subunit's name.
Right.
Yes, individuals are given gallantry awards and all of that, but by and large, when you look at the way the army works, any army in the world, there is much more emphasis on teamwork. There is much more emphasis on collaboration.
Okay.
Matter of fact, even while selecting officers during the SSB, one of the things that is tested very extensively is the ability of that potential leader to be able to get a team working with him.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of emphasis on that. And that's something that you learn at the very basic fundamental.
Right.
I mean, I remember this incident that when I was undergoing training, and I'm sure many young cadets who might be watching this video would be asking the same question. They would be asking the question that every day for your 18 months of training in the Indian Military Academy, or some of the NDA cadets who are watching this for 4 years, throughout their training, on each and every day, they are supposed to do drill for about an hour.
Okay.
Very tough. And often you have to do drill and PT, or PT and drill. So that's two very, very intense physical, sort of exercises right there in the morning before breakfast. So, and one can understand physical training, PT, you can understand that because that toughens you up. But we would always wonder as cadets, why is it that we have to practice 1 hour of drill for so many years, and what does it achieve other than the final passing out parade? Now that's a very big affair, and parents come and everybody, and it's a major
Event for you.
event. But still, one would wonder that why are we wasting our time, and of course it improves your bearing, it gives you a military, sort of the way you stand and all of that. But still, why do we devote so many hours to it?
Sure.
Many years later, I realized. So, when the final passing out parade happens, and there are about these 500 cadets who stand, and they are now going to become officers when they pass out. They stand on the parade ground, and the parade commander, when he gives a command, and he says, "Daine mode," or right turn, the person who's at the extreme right, he has to turn slightly slower, a fraction of a second slower, so that the last person in the parade would be able to turn, because the sound when it reaches it, right? So when you actually watch this parade, you will see those 500 people moving in one single file. It won't be like a stagger. It won't be like that. It will be like that and tack in one.
Synchronized in a very perfect way.
Synchronized to the speed of sound.
Wow, the force and battalion that you work with. So moving to the other question now here, we're quite eager to learn your views about the economic slowdown going on. We can see the AI ML coming into the picture. We see a lot of companies just focusing more on the tech platform based conversational AIs are coming in the market space. So how do you see the market 10 years before, when there was a slowdown, versus now? Will it continue for a longer time? And what will be the effect for both experience and the freshers in the industry space further? Yeah.
For example, I want to use this opportunity to give you this very interesting insight that a friend of mine, Jasprit Bindra, who's written a very nice book called Tech Whisperer, you should read it. He actually speaks about it in a very interesting way. And he says that, we have always had self-driving cars.
Right.
Not just now.
Okay.
We have had it for about 20 years, right? Except we used to call it a lift. Right? Now, the lift changed everything. It changed the skyscrapers.
Right.
in one piece of land you could now house many more people than you could earlier, because the lift has come.
Sure.
Like before the lift, you had a 3 or a 4 floor max. You know, you couldn't go beyond.
Yes.
But with the lift now, you can go up to 100 floors.
100 floors, yeah.
Now it changes everything. It changes technology. It changes architecture. It changes your requirements of groundwater. It changes your parking. It changes everything. And this is an old story that I read many years ago, and I think it's a very powerful story which illustrates this point. And this happened in the game parks of Africa, in Kenya, I think, where in the 70s they suddenly had a major overpopulation in the game park of elephants. You know,
Elephants,
because,
okay.
because there were no natural predators, so it's a game reserve. So elephants. So the number of elephants increased beyond a point where the square footage of the game park could sort of sustain them.
Okay.
And so a decision was taken that they would have to cull some elephants. You know, they would have to kill some of the elephants to cull the herd, as it's called. And they went about it typically as most corporates would. You know, so they got rid of the older elephants, the sicker ones, and they went by the Darwin's survival of the fittest theory. But that strategy turned out to be a disaster.
Okay.
And it was a disaster because what happened is that in the herd of elephants, the matriarch, which is the the older elephants were the ones which had the tribal knowledge. They knew when there is no rain and there is famine, where there are water holes to be found, where are those routes which take
to
them
reach
there,
that place.
to reach that. And similarly, patriarchs and matriarchs in corporates also have that knowledge. They know which IS officer they can reach out to ask for help. They know which vendor they can ask for a line of credit. They know who is the person in a certain department in the government who might be able to guide them in a certain direction. They have those relationships built over 20-30 years, over decades, right? Now if it's the head of sales, for example, he has the ability to pick up the phone and reach out to 3-4 of his very close customer relationship and say, you will have to pick up this much because I have to, So now that tribal knowledge went away, straight away.
Because of the culling of those senior
Because of the culling of the senior elephant. The second reason which happened is that these the older elephants, they maintained a sense of discipline, because the younger rogue, it happens with us also, no? When we are in college or something and you're doing something like
with the leader and
not a kosher activity like say smoking, and you're walking on the colony and suddenly you see your friend's father appear, you will hide that, right? Now you do that because there is a respect for the elder generation. And it's not even your father, it's your friend's father, but you still do that because there is that sense of respect. That went away. Now the rogue elephants, they would start fighting with each other. They would start, trying to mate each other before attaining puberty, because they suddenly saw an hierarchy above them that just disappeared.
There's no parents with them now.
No elder generations, no role models, and that went away. There was no sense of permanence. So the entire herd's sense that we have longevity, we have time, that went. There is no time, and there was a sense of urgency which came, and that basically shattered the fabric of the herd. The last and the most interesting point was many times it was the weak elephant or the disabled elephant which was holding the herd together. The herd would actually coalesce around that elephant, right? And actually you can see that also. I mean, I don't have statistical evidence for it, but I have a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I think that proves the point. You will notice that couples who usually have special needs children, their divorce rates are very low.
Wow, what observation, Captain.
Because they both now have a much bigger problem to solve, rather than each other's egos and each other's issues. So it was the weak child which kept that couple together. It was the weak elephant which held the herd together, and it was that disabled individual, the weak individual, who the team coalesced around and kept, made it a team. And when you removed that, suddenly the locus standi of the team, one of the locus standi of the team broke. So, of course, in the game parks, they realized the mistake. And the next time that they did the culling, they would just select one herd and they would remove that herd completely. They would cull the herd. They would not mess with the team hierarchies and which have been put in place. And I think corporates need to keep that in mind, that in this craze to downsize by also reducing the age and all of that. I understand organizations wanting to become a younger average age, and that is very understandable. But I don't think the method is to basically
Downsize or
slash
dispatch. A set of leaders, yeah.
a set of tribal knowledge containing leaders or even teams which have that relationships between them. That's, I think, the first point that they have to consider.
So, Captain, we would like to know that, I mean, this is more about the conflict of decision-making interest that you have seen in organizations. You have served Mahindra, you have served Lines, and you have worked with the most senior executives in the organizations we see. So, how difficult has it been for you to kind of say them at times no for a particular situation where you feel it cannot be taken forward for them for what they're asking for? It's not compliance based, or it is not good for the organization for a longer view. So, can you state one example for us?
In my careers, both with Mahindra and with Reliance, and of course, when I was with Mahindra, I had the opportunity to work with a consulting firm, Mahindra Special Services Group, which basically did advisory work in security and risk management for a whole host of companies. So, what I'm telling you is not just the experience of these two companies; it's a combined experience of. I think. For any leader, especially those who are responsible for risk management, the trade-off is always between the short and the long term.
Okay.
It's always between the short and the long term, and many times what happens is CXOs, they are driven by quarter results, they are driven by annual performances,
right.
and it's a paradox after all in our management framework, that while we want strategic results from our CXO suite, they are measured on tactical successes. So if you want anything strategic to happen, you need a time span of 4 to 7 years. That's the time it takes. So let's say I want to transform an organization. So I'll have to start working at the foundation. First, I'll have to build the consensus that there is a need for transformation.
Right.
I'll have to go through the phases where you get rid of the naysayers, or you at least isolate them, get out the negative energy,
Right.
give some quick wins,
Right.
get the confidence in the team, get the next generation of leaders to own that process. Now, this takes time.
Yes.
This takes a good 2 to 3 years just to get the foundations in place, and maybe year 4 is when you actually do the breakout and actually make the transformation happen.
Yeah.
Especially if the large organization. A small team takes less time, but large organizations take that much time. But the thing is, all CXOs are measured on an annual basis. So there is this dichotomy that CXOs are sort of conflicted with, that my measurement is going to happen every quarter, literally in some industries, or at least a 12-month period. But what is good for the organization is actually much more strategic.
Sure.
It takes more time. So very often in risk management, the reason why we have to say no is because the short-term success is going to impact the long-term, results.
Yeah.
It will. So you might gain something, in a short manner, but in the long term, it's going to. Now, the construct of a good risk management framework is the ability to look at it at 5,000 feet, 15,000 feet, 50,000 feet, 80,000 feet, and then take the sum total and say, if we go down this path, overall, it's not going to be a good idea. And if that means saying no at that point of time and letting go of certain opportunities, I think, somewhere once I had read this, and I think it's a very powerful definition of focus. Focus, they say, is not what you're focusing on. Focus is letting go of all other opportunities to focus on what you're focusing on.
Okay.
Right? I mean, this is there, by the way, in Mahabharata also, when Arjun is asked to shoot at that fish, and he's asked, what do you see? He doesn't answer, I can see only the fish's eye. That's not the answer he gives. That's what most people think. कि मेरे को सिर्फ मच्छी की आंख नजर आ रही है. He says, मुझे मच्छी की आंख के अलावा कुछ नजर नहीं आ रहा. That's a very different paradigm.
Yes.
That I see nothing else other than this one focus that I have got. So I'm willing to let go of other opportunities. I'm willing to let go of quick wins, because for me this is the long-term focus. Now, as the head of risk or at the head of security, you basically draw your mandate from the board. The board is in the end accountable for the organizations, especially in areas of security and compliance. And so to that extent, I think if I kept my eye focused on the fish, and fish's eye and did not get distracted by, short-term requirements and something, let's do it this one time. And yes, at the same time, I think in any sort of a compliance framework, there has to be a certain amount of accommodation, there has to be a certain amount of resilience.
Yes.
You have to make some exceptions. And I don't mean ethical exceptions, but sometimes you have to make exceptions for the fact that a person may have done a certain set of activities.
Right.
It was a judgment error rather than an intent error.
Sure.
So if you do that sort of a jurisprudence, my sense is very often, I have had very few occasions when I've had to say no. I usually present both the options. I say, if you go down this path, this is what will happen.
Right.
If you go down this path, this is what will happen.
Make your choice.
Rest you are. So, I mean, I remember many years ago, I had done the security assessment and design of a very famous industrialist. I obviously don't want to name him, who had his office in Nariman Point. So at the end of the sort of assessment, when I was giving him, or rather his entire team, the presentation on precautions that have to be taken, So this gentleman, he looked at the whole thing, and at the end of it, he asked me, so what you are effectively telling me, Captain, is that if I'm driving from my office to my home, back home, and I want to stop in Marine Drive and buy a magazine, walk out from my car, go and buy a magazine, you are advising me that I should not do it. That's what you're telling me. I said, that's not what I'm telling you. He said, so should I do it? I said, yes, you should do it. You should walk out. That means the violation of what you have suggested. I said, yeah, it's a violation of what I have suggested. Okay. What I have suggested to you is the mandate given to me by the board to keep you secure, because you are an asset to this company. Right. You are owner of the company, to keep you secure. But what I am advising you, it's one life. You have to take the call. If you feel that you want to go and pick that magazine, go and pick it and come back, and that gives you your, pleasure that you want, go ahead and do it. Yeah. But this is the risk when you do that. So very often when you present the pros and cons in a very simple to understand and no agenda, you do this also, it's your company, your mandate, you want to go, if it's a 0.001% of a risk, you want to take it, go ahead and take it. I think when you present it in options, explaining the rationale, I think any sensible person would understand.
That's a brilliant learning about, and it also helps us to understand about the decision making that we are all going through. And I think somebody just told me even in one of the events that the most difficult part in anyone's life, whether personal or professional, is to make a decision. So that's brilliant, Captain. And we just love to end this with a lovely question that is all coming from the audience for us to ask to you, that we know that you are a pet lover and you love to play and enjoy and cuddle with all the pets that you see around. So can you speak of one learning from your pet that you would like to recommend humans that they can learn from?
Yeah, I am actually quite fond of dogs, and as a kid had dogs, and now also
we see your pictures all over.
I enjoy spending a lot of time with them. I think there are many things you can learn from animals, and especially dogs. And first, of course, you learn unconditional love. There is you can have. You can have many relationships in your life, and even the most intense relationship, I would say, has an agenda on both sides, right? So, I would think that the love between an animal and whatever the pet owner or whatever you want to call it is, I think, one of the purest forms, because whether you're done well this year, you performed well, didn't perform well, you were sacked, promoted, when you come back home, your dog doesn't give a shit.
No strings attached.
There's no strings attached. So I think that's a very pure form of oxytocin you get. By the way, that's the chemical that actually fires in your brain whenever you sort of interact with animals, children, all of that stuff. So that's the chemical that the animals give you, which is a very powerful and the purest form.
Yeah.
The second, of course, you learn, especially when you're training dogs.
Okay.
I think you learn a lot about leadership, because you have to communicate with another creature in a language that is much more about your behavior. Okay. It's not, dogs don't understand English or Hindi or whatever. You can name your dog whatever. The dog doesn't know the meaning of that. Right. It doesn't understand that. It only hears your voice. It sees your face. It sees your body language. and it senses you. It doesn't listen to your command, it senses you.
Right.
So if you're angry and you call a dog, come here, come here, come here. Dog is wary because the dog is not listening to come here. The dog is looking at your entire persona.
Wow.
It's looking at your entire persona. And that, sort of is a very good training to actually be what you are wanting to state. I'll give you an example. Many times in corporates we hear leaders say, I want to empower my team and I want to give 100% empowerment. Then I also want 100% verification. So, I mean, you say one thing and you do another thing. Or you encourage your juniors, you got to take decision. The first decision he takes which doesn't go right, you slam him down like a, bent nail. So, at the end of the day, I think when you're dealing with animals, you have to be WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Because you cannot have one thing that you will talk, another thing that you will do.
Sure.
And I think that's, especially when you work with dogs and you teach them obedience, you teach them, there are certain commands that every dog needs to know for its own safety.
Sure.
The 5 commands, they're called the 5 life commands, which basically is like sit, stop and all of these commands which will enable you to control the dog, especially. Now, these commands, for the dog to understand, you will realize over a period of time that there are 2 ways to do it. One way is to do it with threat and with force.
Right.
Another way to do it is by rewarding the right behavior every time it happens.
Okay.
The first method is usually the faster one.
Right.
And you can achieve that in a faster way.
Yeah.
The second method takes more time.
Okay.
But the second method, the dog which has been trained in the second method will retain initiative. So let's say I have a Doberman, let's say for example. And let's say I could have trained this Doberman in 2 ways. In one way I could have trained it by being very, very authoritative, by basically using the stick, as a metaphor.
Sit, stand, go.
Whatever. But if it makes a mistake, I punish rather than reward. The dog will become very highly trained, and you can do stunts with it, impress your friends, send it for circuses and stuff like that. It will do that. But let's say there is an emergency. Let's say somebody's attacked you, or let's say you are suffering a convulsion, or you're fallen down. The dog will not know what to do because you have taught it only by punishment. Whereas if you teach the dog by reward, that whenever it does the right behavior, you reward it.
Right.
It starts making the connection between the right behavior and the reward.
It differentiates between the both very clearly.
It learns those same skills, but it retains its initiative.
Right.
Now if somebody assaults you or attacks you, it will not wait for your instruction. It will do what it is supposed to do, which is to protect you.
Sure.
Right? That's true for human beings as well.
Captain, that's such a wonderful learning. I think you got very close.
If you get your team to do what you want them to do by stick, by denial of this thing, they will do it.
Sure.
Up to the time you have that stick.
Sure.
But let's say you don't have that stick at any point of time, they will stop doing it. But if you do the latter method, you don't need a stick.
Sure, don't need a stick,
The team will, team will know how to assume orders in the absence of orders.
Wow.
And that's a very, very powerful trait of a team. How to assume orders in the absence of orders.
Wonderful. Quite a good conversation here. So, Captain, recently we all have seen one of the series known as The Family Man, and it quite reminded me about your dynamics when we hear your stories about from the war days. So, how different do you see a real life of a raw agent versus the real life we see in the movies?
So, firstly, of course, NatGrid has nothing to do with RNAW and the other agencies. I mean, that's and frankly, my view on that is not so much about my experience from the NatGrid, but by being in I have many friends who are in these different agencies and my experience of the army.
Sure.
So quite frankly, when you watch these movies or series like Family Man and 24 or James Bond or whatever, these are meant for entertainment. Okay. I think they have as much of relevance in real life as maybe a movie about journalists has in real life, or a movie about... So I think obviously they are modeled on real life experiences and occurrences, but obviously in the real world, agents are not driving fast cars and fast girls and dry martini and all of that. I think it's a much more laborious, it involves drudgery, it involves waiting, it involves chasing hundreds of leads and getting disappointed again and again and again and again and again. It is finding that you are almost there and then your hands are tied because you are the good guys and you can't do things outside the law. And so therefore, though you know that this is the person, though you know that this is you still cannot so it's a life of frustration. It's a life of not getting recognized. As they say in the intelligence world, that hundreds of their successes will never be known. Because if they intercept, let's say, a vehicle which is carrying 4 AK-47s and maybe 2 people inside, you will never know about it, and what could have been the catastrophe if these guys had maybe entered a mall and created a shootout. You will never come to know that. But when they have one failure, that will not just be known, but heads will roll, and that's the reality of that. So it's a very, very frustrating and a very thankless job in many ways. I mean, I would say to a certain extent, those who are in uniform and those who are fighting openly
for the nation and
for the nation, like in the army or paramilitary forces, they still, I would sort of say, they still get the recognition and all of that. But a lot of our shadow warriors, as we call them, who never come out into the limelight. And they're very nondescript people. I mean, you could be sitting next to them and you wouldn't know who they are. And that's their job. And they're supposed to be good at their job in doing that. And unfortunately, I think in our country, we haven't really recognized incredible things that these agencies and these men and women who work in these agencies do for the nation. And,
so, Captain, it's more of because of the governance that you see if you compare this with the rest of the European nations.
No, it's the nature of the beast. I think anywhere in the world, it's not just in India. I think anywhere in the world, the intelligence services are often kept. They have to sort of be discreet and not very overt, and that is true in almost all countries. Indian agencies, I think, are a little bit more discreet than several others, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's this is not the game of flamboyance. This is a game of subtlety. And though in films and movies flamboyance is what is required, in real life it is remaining below the surface, being very discreet. That is actually much more efficient trait of a good officer.
So, Captain, for this simple question, आपके लिए, how do you remain to be so fit?
I wish I was fitter than I am, but anyway, I think one of the easiest things to do is to just run. You can do it anywhere. I mean, of course, except cities like Delhi and all, you can't do it outside. But I think it's the simplest exercise. If you just do a half an hour run every day or an hour run, whatever it's your, and you burn the calories, you get the right chemicals in your brain, you get...
Oxytocin you mentioned.
Oxytocin is actually more from animals. This is much more dopamine and cholesterol and the other few chemicals which kick in when you, especially serotonin and the others, which when you do physical exercises. So my sense is, at a macro level, and sometimes I see, fairly young people, who have health issues, and these aren't like chronic health issues. These are very clearly lifestyle health issues. These are issues of being overweight and obese at a very young age. I think most people take their body for granted. I look at I have nowhere else to live. I have no other place to live. So, in a way, if you realize that your whether you are CEO, whether you are working, whether you are ambitious, at the end of the day, if health is not there, then nothing else really matters. Nothing else matters. So I think this body and the health that we take for granted in many cases, it's a stupid thing to do. And so therefore, at least half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour, whatever is the appetite for an individual, I think that is an essential part of leadership also. Because all said and done, let's not, this is not about running a marathon, but let's say that you are in a negotiation. And let's say the negotiation is drawing hour after hour after, which happens in many strategic negotiations. It is by design that they will start the meeting at a time when you are jet lagged, you are fatigued. They will extend it to a period where you are physically. So you have to have the physical stamina to keep at it, right? And if you take two individuals, let's say they begin their career at the age of 20, both are educated in the same institution, both are doing well, and let's say one person by the age of 50 has that energy level that when he wakes up in the morning, she wakes up in the morning, she's got mojo, and the other person is already obese, wheezing, getting up, has health problems. There is no way that the person who is not healthy can compete with the person who's healthy. It's not going to happen.
Wow.
You can't compete, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean competing in a marathon. I mean competing in just the whole your quality of decisions that you take have a direct bearing on your energy level. This has been proven, by the way. This has been, there are the fascinating studies which prove that judgments given by judges post-lunch, when they are more fatigued, are very, very different than the judgments given by them in the early, So your energy level changes even the decisions you take.
Right, it impacts everything.
It happens to you also. Let's say that you are in full of energy, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you're going on a trek, and as you're going on a trek, you get a message saying you've just been promoted, and something great has happened, and something else has happened, and you come to a fork.
Yeah.
One fork is an unknown road, and one fork you know. You're feeling adventurous. You're more likely to take the unknown road.
Unknown road, yeah. You want to take that risk. You
You
want
will
to challenge
explore.
it.
You will do that.
Yeah.
Let's say, on the other hand, when you're in the same trek and you come short of that fork, the message you get is you have been retrenched, right? Something bad has happened,
Yeah.
and you're feeling like, what are you going to do now when you come to that? Now you're going to be risk averse.
Yeah.
Now nothing has changed the parameters
Right.
of the terrain. Nothing has changed. What has changed is your energy level.
Right.
If you're fatigued, if your body is feeling fatigued, you cannot take high energy decisions, and you will choose the paths of least resistance. So I think that is the importance of being physically fit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take that much. I think beyond 45 minutes to an hour a day, or even alternate days.
You should still do it. Yeah. So, Captain, that's good, and I think I think we need to have 2 of the series actually posted for our captains. Learnings that we have actually got, and I hope our audience have really enjoyed and picked the right insights that Captain has shared with us. So hopefully we have enjoyed the conversation with you, Captain, and hopefully see you once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a ton.